A young nurse rushed through the sterile corridors of Riverside General Hospital, clutching a steaming ceramic mug filled with what looked like ordinary tea. Behind her, alarms blared as a decorated Air Force pilot lay dying in the emergency room, his body rejecting every conventional treatment the medical team had tried. What happened next would shake the foundations of modern medicine and catch the attention of the highest office in the land. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in Emergency Room Ward 3 cast their familiar harsh glow across the polished linoleum floors of Riverside General Hospital. It was the kind of lighting that made everyone look tired, but for Sarah Martinez, exhaustion wasn't just from the artificial brightness. She had been pulling double shifts for 3 weeks straight, covering for colleagues who had called in sick during the latest wave of seasonal illnesses that seemed to hit their small town harder each year. Sarah moved through her rounds with the quiet efficiency that had earned her respect among the nursing staff, even though she was still relatively new to Riverside General. At 28, she possessed a combination of genuine compassion and practical skill that made patients feel comfortable even during their most vulnerable moments. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory as she checked on each patient, reminding her that healing came not just from medicine, but from the intention behind every touch, every word, every moment of care. The Pine Valley neighborhood where Sarah had grown up was a working-class community where families looked out for each other, where neighbors knew each other's names, and where traditional wisdom was passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. Her grandmother, Elena Martinez, had been a bridge between two worlds, her Cherokee heritage and the modern medical practices that dominated their small town. Elena had taught Sarah that nature held remedies that science was only beginning to understand, but she had also encouraged her granddaughter to pursue formal nursing education. Sarah's small apartment reflected this blend of old and new. Medical textbooks sat next to handwritten recipe cards for herbal teas. Modern nursing uniforms hung in the closet next to a traditional Cherokee shawl that had belonged to her grandmother. On her kitchen windowsill, small pots of herbs grew in careful rows, not just for cooking, but for the healing teas that Elena had taught her to brew for minor ailments. The other nurses at Riverside General knew Sarah as someone who genuinely cared about her patients' well-being beyond their immediate medical needs. She remembered their names, asked about their families, and had a way of making even the grumpiest patients smile. Her supervisor, Lisa Chen, had noticed how patient satisfaction scores consistently improved on Sarah's shifts, though Sarah herself never seemed to realize the impact she was having. Lisa had been working at Riverside General for nearly 15 years and had seen plenty of nurses come and go. Some were technically excellent but lacked the human touch. Others had huge hearts but struggled with the demanding pace of hospital work. Sarah was different. She seemed to understand instinctively that healing involved more than just following protocols and administering medications correctly. The emergency room had been unusually quiet that Tuesday evening in late October. The autumn air carried the first real chill of the season, and the changing leaves created a tapestry of gold and crimson that could be glimpsed through the hospital's windows. Sarah had been looking forward to a relatively calm shift, perhaps even getting a chance to catch up on some continuing education reading that she had been putting off. Dr. Richard Hawthorne had just finished his rounds and was settling into his office to review patient charts when the call came in. As the head of emergency medicine, Dr. Hawthorne commanded respect through a combination of impressive credentials and an authoritative presence that made both staff and patients pay attention when he spoke. He had graduated from prestigious medical schools, completed his residency at renowned hospitals, and had built a reputation for making quick, decisive treatment decisions under pressure. However, Dr. Hawthorne also carried himself with an air of superiority that sometimes made interactions with staff feel more like instructions being issued than collaborative conversations. He believed deeply in evidence-based medicine and had little patience for what he considered unscientific approaches to patient care. His office walls were lined with diplomas, medical journals, and awards that testified to his expertise and commitment to conventional medical excellence. The emergency radio crackled to life just as Sarah was finishing her documentation for the evening's earlier patients. The paramedic's voice carried an urgency that immediately commanded attention throughout the ward. They were bringing in a military pilot who had experienced some kind of severe allergic reaction during what was being described only as a routine training exercise. The patient was unconscious, his vital signs were unstable, and initial attempts to stabilize him had been only partially successful. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she joined the other staff members preparing for the incoming emergency. Lisa Chen appeared beside her, already pulling on fresh gloves and checking that all the necessary equipment was ready and functioning. The two women had developed an efficient working rhythm over the months they had been colleagues, and Sarah appreciated how Lisa always seemed to anticipate what would be needed before anyone had to ask. Dr. Hawthorne emerged from his office, his white coat pristine and his expression focused. He began issuing instructions to prepare specific medications and equipment, his voice carrying the confident authority that came from years of handling medical emergencies. The entire emergency room shifted into the heightened state of readiness that marked the difference between routine care and potential life-or-death situations. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its red and blue lights painting moving patterns across the hospital's entrance. The paramedics wheeled in a stretcher carrying a man in his early 30s, still wearing the flight suit that marked him as military personnel. His name tag read Thompson, M., and his rank indicated that he was a captain in the Air Force. Even unconscious and clearly in medical distress, Captain Michael Thompson carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to responsibility and command. Captain Thompson had been stationed at Willow Creek Air Force Base, about 40 miles from Riverside General Hospital. He was known among his fellow pilots as someone who approached his duties with both skill and humility, never taking unnecessary risks but always willing to push himself to excel at his responsibilities. His service record included commendations for both his flying abilities and his leadership qualities, and he was being considered for promotion to major in the coming year. The medical team immediately began their assessment protocols. Captain Thompson's breathing was labored, his skin showed signs of an allergic reaction that seemed to be progressing rapidly, and his blood pressure readings were concerning. Dr. Hawthorne took charge of the situation with his characteristic decisiveness, ordering a series of standard treatments for severe allergic reactions. The team worked with practiced efficiency, each member knowing their role in the carefully choreographed dance of emergency medicine. Sarah found herself assigned to monitor Captain Thompson's vital signs and assist with medication administration. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice something that the others seemed to miss. The pattern of the captain's symptoms didn't quite match what she would expect from a typical allergic reaction. Having grown up listening to her grandmother's stories about different types of plant poisonings and natural toxins, Sarah recognized subtle signs that might not be immediately obvious to those trained exclusively in conventional medical protocols. Her grandmother had taught her that nature could be both healer and harm, that the same plants that could cure could also poison if used incorrectly or encountered in the wrong circumstances. Elena had shared stories of traditional healers who could recognize the difference between various types of natural toxins by observing patterns that modern medicine might overlook. These weren't superstitions or folk tales, but accumulated wisdom based on generations of careful observation. As the evening progressed, Captain Thompson's condition remained critical despite the medical team's best efforts. The standard treatments for allergic reactions were having limited effect, and some of his symptoms seemed to be worsening rather than improving. Dr. Hawthorne consulted medical references, ordered additional tests, and tried variations of the established protocols. But nothing seemed to provide the breakthrough they needed. Sarah watched and assisted, following orders and maintaining her professional demeanor, but internally she felt a growing conviction that there might be another approach worth considering. The pattern of symptoms reminded her of something her grandmother had described, a specific type of plant toxin that required a particular antidote, one that wasn't found in standard medical supplies but could be created from readily available herbs if someone knew the traditional preparation methods. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The problem was that suggesting such an approach would mean challenging Dr. Hawthorne's authority and proposing something that had no place in conventional medical practice. Sarah was still relatively new to the hospital, and she understood the hierarchy that governed medical decision-making. Nurses, no matter how knowledgeable or intuitive, were expected to follow doctors' orders, not to suggest alternative treatments based on traditional folk medicine. But as she continued to monitor Captain Thompson's vital signs, watching the numbers that told the story of a life hanging in the balance, Sarah felt the weight of her grandmother's teachings pressing against the constraints of hospital protocol. Elena had always told her that healing was a responsibility that transcended professional boundaries, that sometimes the most important thing a healer could do was speak up when they saw a different path forward. The night was still young, and Captain Thompson's battle for life was just beginning. In the sterile environment of Riverside General Hospital, ancient wisdom and modern medicine were about to collide in ways that would test everyone's assumptions about healing, authority, and the courage required to challenge established systems when lives hang in the balance. The digital clock above Captain Thompson's bed displayed 11:47 p.m. in harsh red numbers that seemed to mock the urgency of the situation. His condition had not improved despite 3 hours of intensive treatment, and if anything, the mysterious symptoms were becoming more pronounced. His breathing had grown increasingly shallow, and the distinctive rash that had first appeared on his hands was now spreading up his arms in an irregular pattern that defied standard medical explanation. Dr. Hawthorne stood at the foot of the bed, his usually confident demeanor showing the first cracks of uncertainty. He had administered every protocol in the emergency medicine handbook for severe allergic reactions, consulted with specialists at larger hospitals via telephone, and even contacted the Air Force Medical Command for any additional information about what Captain Thompson might have been exposed to during his training exercise. The military had been frustratingly vague, citing classified training procedures and operational security concerns. Sarah continued her careful monitoring of the captain's vital signs, noting subtle changes that the digital equipment might miss. Her grandmother had taught her to observe patients with all her senses, not just rely on machines and numbers. The captain's skin had taken on a particular pallor that reminded her of something Elena had described, and there was a faint but distinctive smell that seemed to cling to his clothing beneath the standard hospital odors of antiseptic and medication. Lisa Chen approached Sarah's station, carrying another round of lab results that Dr. Hawthorne had ordered. The test results showed elevated levels of various compounds in Captain Thompson's blood, but nothing that clearly pointed to a specific toxin or allergen. Lisa noticed the concerned expression on Sarah's face and paused beside her colleague. "What are you thinking?" Lisa asked quietly, keeping her voice low enough that Dr. Hawthorne wouldn't overhear from across the room where he was consulting yet another medical reference. Sarah hesitated for a moment, weighing her words carefully. Some of these symptoms don't quite fit the standard allergic reaction pattern. The way the rash is spreading, the particular color changes in his skin, even the smell that's coming from his clothes. It reminds me of something my grandmother used to describe. Lisa raised an eyebrow. She knew about Sarah's background and had always respected her colleague's intuitive understanding of patient care, but this was venturing into territory that could be professionally risky. What kind of something? A specific type of plant poisoning that occurs when someone comes into contact with a particular combination of vegetation. The symptoms can mimic severe allergic reactions, but the treatment approach is completely different. Standard allergy medications can actually make it worse because they don't address the underlying toxin. Before Lisa could respond, Dr. Hawthorne's voice cut across the room with sharp authority. "Nurse Martinez, I need you to prepare another dose of epinephrine. We're going to try a higher concentration." Sarah looked up from her monitoring equipment, her heart rate quickening. Based on what she suspected about Captain Thompson's condition, additional epinephrine could potentially worsen his symptoms rather than improve them. She found herself at a crossroads that every healthcare professional dreads, the moment when their professional judgment conflicts with direct orders from a superior. "Dr. Hawthorne," Sarah said, her voice steady but respectful, "I wonder if we might consider that this could be something other than a standard allergic reaction. Some of the symptom patterns suggest." Dr. Hawthorne interrupted her with a look that could have frozen the emergency room's climate control system. "Nurse Martinez, I appreciate your concern, but I need you to prepare the medication I've ordered. We're dealing with a life-threatening emergency here, and I don't have time for speculation based on folk remedies." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt the eyes of the other staff members on her, and she could sense the tension that had suddenly filled the room. In the hierarchy of hospital medicine, nurses who questioned doctors' orders were stepping far outside their expected roles, especially when those doctors had Dr. Hawthorne's credentials and reputation. But as Sarah looked back at Captain Thompson, watching his chest rise and fall with increasing difficulty, she thought about her grandmother's voice and the responsibility that came with knowledge that might save a life. Elena had always taught her that healing was not about ego or professional boundaries, but about doing whatever was necessary to help someone in need. "With respect, Dr. Hawthorne, I believe this might be exposure to a specific plant toxin that my grandmother taught me about. The pattern of symptoms, the way the rash is spreading, even the distinctive odor, they all match what she described as requiring a very different treatment approach." Dr. Hawthorne set down his medical reference with enough force to make several staff members jump. His face flushed with a combination of anger and professional indignation that made it clear he was not accustomed to having his medical authority questioned by nursing staff. "Nurse Martinez, I'm going to say this once and I expect you to listen carefully. I have over 15 years of emergency medicine experience, medical degrees from 2 prestigious universities, and board certifications that qualify me to make treatment decisions in this hospital. What I do not need is nursing staff suggesting treatment protocols based on folk tales and superstition." The emergency room fell silent except for the beeping of monitoring equipment and the soft hiss of ventilation systems. Other staff members continued their work but clearly strained to hear the conversation that was unfolding. This kind of direct confrontation between a head physician and a nurse was unusual enough to command attention, and everyone understood that the outcome would have implications beyond just this one patient. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and frustration, but she also felt the steady presence of her grandmother's wisdom guiding her response. Elena had faced similar dismissals throughout her life, people who discounted traditional knowledge simply because it didn't come with official credentials or scientific validation. But Elena had also taught Sarah that sometimes the most important thing a healer could do was persist in speaking truth, even when others refused to listen. Dr. Hawthorne, I understand your position and I respect your experience. But my grandmother wasn't practicing superstition. She was a traditional healer who worked closely with medical professionals for over 40 years. She documented her treatments, tracked patient outcomes, and built relationships with doctors who learned to value her knowledge. What I'm suggesting isn't folklore, it's accumulated wisdom based on generations of careful observation. Dr. Hawthorne's expression grew even more stern. Nurse Martinez, traditional healing and anecdotal evidence have no place in modern emergency medicine. We base our treatments on peer-reviewed research, clinical trials, and established medical protocols. If you cannot follow my orders without question, perhaps you need to reconsider whether emergency medicine is the right fit for your career. The threat was unmistakable, and Sarah felt the weight of her relatively new position at Riverside General Hospital pressing down on her shoulders. She had worked hard to earn her place on the nursing staff, and Dr. Hawthorne clearly had the authority to make her professional life very difficult if she continued to challenge his decisions. Lisa Chen stepped closer to Sarah's station, her presence offering subtle support without openly defying Dr. Hawthorne's authority. Several other nurses glanced over with expressions that seemed to encourage Sarah to back down and avoid further confrontation. The unspoken message was clear: choose your battles wisely, and this might not be the right one to fight. But Captain Thompson's breathing had become even more labored during the exchange, and Sarah noticed that his skin was taking on a grayish tinge that her grandmother had described as a dangerous progression of the specific toxin she suspected. If she was right, they were running out of time for conventional treatments to have any positive effect. And if she was right, the additional epinephrine that Dr. Hawthorne wanted to administer could push the captain's system past the point of recovery. Dr. Hawthorne, Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm, I'm not questioning your medical expertise or your authority. But I am asking you to consider that there might be something here that falls outside standard medical training. My grandmother treated cases like this, and she taught me to recognize the signs. If I'm wrong, giving the epinephrine might help. But if I'm right, it could kill him. The emergency room seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Hawthorne stared at Sarah with an expression that mixed disbelief with growing anger. Other staff members found suddenly urgent tasks that required their complete attention, trying to avoid being drawn into a confrontation that could have serious professional consequences for everyone involved. Nurse Martinez, you are suggesting that your grandmother's folk medicine supersedes my medical training and 15 years of emergency medicine experience. You are essentially accusing me of potentially killing a patient through standard medical care. Do you understand how inappropriate and potentially libelous that suggestion is? Sarah felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back and maintained her composure. She thought about Captain Thompson lying unconscious, depending on the medical team to save his life. She thought about her grandmother, who had faced similar dismissals but had never stopped advocating for her patients. And she thought about the responsibility that came with knowledge that might make the difference between life and death. I understand that my suggestion sounds unusual, Dr. Hawthorne. But I also understand that Captain Thompson's condition is not responding to standard treatments, and his symptoms are progressing in a way that suggests we might be dealing with something that requires a different approach. I'm not asking you to abandon medical protocols. I'm asking you to consider that there might be additional information that could help save his life. Dr. Hawthorne walked over to Sarah's monitoring station, his expression cold and his voice dropping to a level that only she and Lisa could hear clearly. Nurse Martinez, you have exactly one choice to make right now. You can prepare the epinephrine dose that I have ordered, following the medical protocols that govern this hospital, or you can clock out and go home while I determine whether your continued employment here is appropriate. Which is it going to be? The ultimatum hung between them like a sword waiting to fall. Sarah looked at the syringe tray beside Captain Thompson's bed, then at the man whose life hung in the balance. Then back at Dr. Hawthorne's uncompromising expression. Around them, the emergency room continued its normal rhythms, but Sarah felt as though she stood at the center of a storm that would determine not just Captain Thompson's fate, but her own future as a nurse. In that moment, Sarah remembered her grandmother's final conversation with her before Elena had passed away 2 years earlier. They had been sitting in Elena's small kitchen, sharing tea made from herbs grown in the same windowsill garden that Sarah now maintained in her own apartment. Elena had taken Sarah's hands in her weathered ones and spoken with the clarity that comes from a lifetime of healing others. Mija, Elena had said, there will come times when you know something that others don't believe. When your knowledge could help someone, but speaking up might cost you something important. In those moments, you have to decide what kind of healer you want to be. You can be safe and keep quiet, or you can be brave and speak truth even when others refuse to listen. Sarah reached for the syringe that Dr. Hawthorne had ordered, her hand trembling slightly as she grasped it. But instead of preparing the epinephrine injection, she set the syringe back down and looked directly into Dr. Hawthorne's eyes. Dr. Hawthorne, I cannot in good conscience administer that medication without first asking you to consider an alternative approach. If you decide to proceed with the epinephrine, I will document that I advised against it based on my assessment of the patient's symptoms. And if Captain Thompson's condition deteriorates further, I want it on record that there was another option. We didn't explore. The gauntlet was thrown, and there was no taking it back. The tension in Emergency Room Ward 3 reached a breaking point as Dr. Hawthorne processed Sarah's refusal to follow his direct order. His face flushed deeper, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might explode with professional indignation. But before he could respond, the monitoring equipment beside Captain Thompson's bed began emitting a series of urgent beeps that immediately commanded everyone's attention. Captain Thompson's blood pressure was dropping rapidly, and his oxygen saturation levels were falling below safe parameters. The standard treatments were not only failing to help but appeared to be contributing to his deteriorating condition. Dr. Hawthorne rushed to the bedside, his anger at Sarah temporarily set aside as medical training took over. He barked orders for additional medications and equipment, but even as the team scrambled to respond, it became increasingly clear that conventional approaches were proving inadequate. Sarah watched the monitors with growing certainty that her suspicions were correct. The pattern of decline matched exactly what her grandmother had described when the wrong treatments were applied to specific plant toxin exposures. Every medication they administered seemed to push Captain Thompson further from recovery rather than closer to it. Lisa Chen noticed Sarah's expression and moved closer to her colleague's workstation. Despite the professional risks involved, Lisa had developed enough respect for Sarah's intuitive understanding of patient care to take her concerns seriously. She leaned in close enough to speak without being overheard by Dr. Hawthorne. What would your grandmother have done? Lisa whispered, her question carrying an undertone of genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. Sarah glanced around the emergency room, noting that Dr. Hawthorne was completely focused on implementing increasingly aggressive conventional treatments. She would have prepared a specific herbal compound that neutralizes the toxin. It's made from plants that grow commonly around here, but they have to be prepared in a very particular way. Lisa's eyebrows rose slightly. How particular? The preparation involves steeping specific ratios of herbs at precise temperatures for exact time periods. My grandmother taught me that the traditional healers who developed this treatment understood the chemistry involved, even if they didn't use modern scientific terminology to describe it. The plants contain compounds that bind to the toxin and help the body eliminate it safely. As if summoned by their conversation, an unexpected voice joined the discussion. Excuse me, nurses, but I couldn't help overhearing your conversation about herbal treatments. Sarah and Lisa turned to see an elderly woman standing just outside Captain Thompson's treatment area. She was well-dressed but not ostentatious, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the medical situation unfolding before her. Her presence in the emergency room was unusual enough to warrant explanation. I'm Dr. Margaret Sullivan, the woman continued, extending her hand toward Sarah. I'm a retired physician, and I was here visiting another patient when I heard the discussion about traditional plant medicine. I hope you don't mind my intrusion, but your conversation caught my attention because I've encountered similar cases during my career. Dr. Hawthorne looked up from Captain Thompson's bedside, clearly annoyed at the interruption but uncertain how to respond to another physician, even a retired one. Dr. Sullivan, I appreciate your interest, but we're dealing with a critical emergency here and following established medical protocols. Dr. Sullivan nodded respectfully but maintained her position. Of course, Dr. Hawthorne. I wouldn't dream of interfering with your treatment decisions. But I wonder if I might share some relevant experience from my years practicing in rural areas where traditional medicine and modern approaches sometimes intersected. Sarah felt a flutter of hope mixed with apprehension. Having another medical professional acknowledge the potential value of traditional healing knowledge was encouraging, but she also worried that Dr. Sullivan's intervention might further antagonize Dr. Hawthorne and make the situation more complicated. During my residency 40 years ago, Dr. Sullivan continued, I worked in a rural hospital that served several Native American communities. We encountered cases where patients presented with symptoms that didn't respond to standard treatments. And we learned to work with traditional healers who understood local environmental toxins that weren't covered in our medical textbooks. Dr. Hawthorne's expression suggested he was struggling between professional courtesy toward a fellow physician and impatience with what he clearly considered irrelevant historical anecdotes. Dr. Sullivan, I'm sure your experiences were valuable. But we're dealing with a military pilot who was exposed to something during a training exercise. This isn't a case of traditional medicine on a reservation. Actually, Dr. Sullivan replied gently, the military training facilities in this region often encompass areas where specific plant combinations grow naturally. Pilots who are forced to take emergency survival training sometimes encounter vegetation that can cause exactly the kind of symptoms you're seeing here. The monitors beside Captain Thompson's bed continued their ominous beeping, and his condition appeared to be worsening despite the increasing intensity of conventional treatments. Sarah noticed that Dr. Hawthorne was beginning to show signs of the frustration that comes when medical expertise encounters its limitations. Dr. Sullivan approached Captain Thompson's bedside with the confidence of someone accustomed to evaluating medical situations. She observed his symptoms with the practiced eye of decades of clinical experience, noting details that confirmed Sarah's suspicions about the nature of his condition. The pattern of skin discoloration, the specific type of respiratory distress, the way his system is responding to standard allergy treatments, Dr. Sullivan murmured, more to herself than to the others. I've seen this before. It's consistent with exposure to a particular combination of plants that grow in survival training areas. Sarah felt validation flooding through her, but she also recognized that the situation remained precarious. Dr. Hawthorne still held ultimate authority over Captain Thompson's treatment, and he had already made clear his opposition to approaches that departed from standard medical protocols. Dr. Sullivan, Sarah said carefully, my grandmother taught me about treatments for this type of toxin exposure. She worked with physicians in rural areas and documented her methods carefully. Would you be willing to review her notes? Dr. Sullivan's eyes brightened with interest. Your grandmother was a traditional healer? What was her background? Cherokee heritage, but she also studied with other traditional healers and worked alongside medical professionals for decades. She kept detailed records of her treatments and their outcomes. I have her journals at home. Dr. Hawthorne interjected with obvious exasperation. Ladies, I appreciate this fascinating discussion of medical anthropology, but I have a dying patient who needs immediate treatment based on established emergency medicine protocols. Dr. Sullivan, surely you understand that we cannot experiment with folk remedies when someone's life is at stake. Dr. Sullivan turned to face Dr. Hawthorne directly, her expression respectful but firm. Dr. Hawthorne, I completely understand your position and your responsibility to this patient. But I also understand that when conventional treatments are proving ineffective, sometimes we need to consider alternatives that might seem unusual but have documented success in similar cases. The emergency room fell into an uncomfortable silence as the two physicians regarded each other across an ideological divide that represented decades of medical evolution and professional philosophy. Sarah found herself caught between hope and despair, watching as Captain Thompson's condition continued to deteriorate while the adults debated treatment approaches. Lisa Chen stepped forward with characteristic practical wisdom. What if we contacted the Air Force Medical Command again? They might have additional information about what Captain Thompson was exposed to during his training exercise. If we knew more about the specific circumstances, it might help determine whether traditional treatment methods are worth considering. Dr. Hawthorne nodded grudgingly. That's a reasonable suggestion. I'll make the call. As Dr. Hawthorne moved to the telephone, Dr. Sullivan approached Sarah with quiet intensity. Tell me more about your grandmother's treatment for this type of toxin exposure. What plants did she use, and how were they prepared? Sarah felt a rush of gratitude toward Dr. Sullivan for taking her knowledge seriously. She used a combination of willow bark, elderberry, and wild cherry bark, prepared as a concentrated tea with specific steeping temperatures and timing. She said the compounds in these plants work together to neutralize the toxin and support the body's natural detoxification processes. Did she document the dosages and preparation methods? Yes, everything is written down in her journals. She was very careful about measurements and timing because she said the treatment could be dangerous if prepared incorrectly. Dr. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. How far away is your home? Could someone retrieve these journals quickly? Before Sarah could answer, Dr. Hawthorne's voice carried across the room with obvious frustration. The Air Force Medical Command is being typically unhelpful. They're citing classified information and operational security concerns. All they'll tell me is that Captain Thompson was participating in survival training exercises in a wooded area approximately 60 miles north of here. Dr. Sullivan and Sarah exchanged meaningful glances. The wooded areas north of their location were known for having exactly the type of plant combinations that could cause the symptoms Captain Thompson was displaying. Dr. Hawthorne, Dr. Sullivan said, given the lack of response to conventional treatments and the additional information about Captain Thompson's possible exposure environment, would you be willing to consider a consultation approach? We could review the traditional treatment methods while continuing current protocols, and perhaps identify elements that might complement your care plan. Sarah held her breath, recognizing that Dr. Sullivan was offering Dr. Hawthorne a way to consider alternative treatments without appearing to abandon his medical authority or admit that conventional approaches were inadequate. Dr. Hawthorne looked at Captain Thompson's deteriorating vital signs, then at the frustrated expressions of his nursing staff, then back at Dr. Sullivan's confident demeanor. The weight of professional responsibility pressed against the reality of medical limitations, creating a moment of decision that would determine whether traditional knowledge would be allowed to contribute to modern emergency care. What exactly are you proposing? Dr. Hawthorne asked, his tone suggesting cautious consideration rather than outright rejection. I'm proposing that we expand our treatment approach to include traditional methods that have documented success with this type of toxin exposure, while maintaining all current monitoring and support systems. If Nurse Martinez's grandmother documented her treatments as thoroughly as she indicates, we would have a foundation for informed decision-making rather than blind experimentation. Sarah felt her pulse quickening as she realized that Dr. Sullivan was creating an opportunity for her grandmother's knowledge to be heard and evaluated rather than dismissed. But she also understood that the next few minutes would determine whether Captain Thompson would receive the treatment she believed could save his life. Lisa Chen stepped forward with practical urgency. Sarah, how quickly could you get to your apartment and back with your grandmother's journals? 15 minutes each way if I drive fast. Dr. Hawthorne looked at the monitors showing Captain Thompson's continued decline, at Dr. Sullivan's expectant expression, and at Sarah's hopeful but anxious face. The decision he made in the next moment would either open the door to an unprecedented collaboration between traditional and modern medicine or close it definitively in favor of conventional protocols alone. The emergency room waited in suspended anticipation as professional authority wrestled with medical necessity and human desperation collided with institutional protocol. Dr. Hawthorne stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, his eyes moving between Captain Thompson's failing vital signs and the expectant faces surrounding him. The weight of command decisions was familiar territory for him, but this particular choice carried implications that extended far beyond standard medical protocols. Finally, he exhaled slowly and nodded toward Sarah. 30 minutes, he said, his voice carrying reluctant authorization mixed with professional skepticism. You have 30 minutes to retrieve these journals and return. Dr. Sullivan, I'm holding you responsible for evaluating whatever documentation Nurse Martinez provides. If we're going to deviate from established protocols, I need another physician willing to stake their professional reputation on the decision. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with gratitude and terror. Dr. Sullivan's presence had created an opening that might not have existed otherwise, but now she faced the pressure of proving that her grandmother's knowledge could save Captain Thompson's life. She grabbed her keys and headed toward the exit, pausing only to squeeze Lisa's hand in silent thanks for her support. The drive to her apartment in Pine Valley felt both endless and instantaneous. Sarah's mind raced through memories of her grandmother's teachings, trying to recall every detail about the specific preparation Elena had described for this type of toxin exposure. The herbs themselves were common enough, but the precise measurements, steeping temperatures, and timing were critical elements that could mean the difference between healing and harm. Sarah's apartment reflected the careful organization that her nursing training had reinforced but her grandmother had originally taught. Elena's journals occupied a place of honor on a bookshelf beside the kitchen window, their worn leather covers testimony to decades of careful documentation. Sarah pulled 3 specific volumes from the collection, knowing that Elena had organized her records by type of treatment rather than chronological order. As she drove back toward Riverside General Hospital, Sarah caught herself speaking aloud to her grandmother's memory, asking for guidance and strength to present Elena's knowledge in a way that would convince skeptical medical professionals. The journals on the passenger seat represented not just treatment protocols, but a lifetime of healing wisdom that deserved respectful consideration rather than dismissive rejection. The emergency room atmosphere had grown even more tense during Sarah's absence. Captain Thompson's condition had continued its alarming decline, and Dr. Hawthorne's frustration with conventional treatment failures was becoming increasingly obvious. Dr. Sullivan had remained beside the patient's bed, observing his symptoms with the analytical attention of someone comparing clinical observations with theoretical knowledge. Sarah placed the journals on a nearby medical cart and opened to pages that Elena had marked with careful annotations. The handwriting was precise and methodical, reflecting Elena's understanding that documentation would be crucial for gaining acceptance of traditional treatments within medical settings. Each entry included detailed descriptions of symptoms, exact measurements of herbal preparations, preparation methods, administration schedules, and patient outcomes. Dr. Sullivan examined the journals with obvious respect for their thoroughness and organization. Elena had not only recorded her treatments but had also included sketches of plant identification, seasonal variation notes, and cross-references to other traditional healers who had used similar methods. The documentation represented a level of scientific rigor that impressed even skeptical medical professionals. "These are extraordinarily detailed," Dr. Sullivan murmured, reading through Elena's careful notes. "Your grandmother understood the importance of reproducible methods and documented outcomes. This isn't folk medicine as most people understand it, this is systematic traditional healing with careful attention to scientific principles." Dr. Hawthorne approached the journals with obvious reluctance, but his medical training compelled him to examine the evidence that Dr. Sullivan found so compelling. As he read through Elena's meticulous documentation, his expression shifted from skepticism toward grudging acknowledgement of the thoroughness and intelligence behind the recorded treatments. "The plant combinations she describes," Dr. Hawthorne said slowly, "they contain compounds that could theoretically address the biochemical mechanisms involved in this type of toxin exposure. The preparation methods seem designed to maximize extraction of specific alkaloids while minimizing potentially harmful elements." Sarah felt a wave of vindication mixed with renewed urgency. Captain Thompson's breathing had become increasingly labored during the examination of Elena's journals, and his skin was taking on the grayish pallor that Elena had described as indicating advanced toxin progression. Time was running short for any treatment approach to be effective. Dr. Sullivan looked up from the journals with decisive authority. "Dr. Hawthorne, based on this documentation and my own experience with similar cases, I believe we should proceed with the traditional treatment protocol while maintaining full supportive care. The patient is not responding to conventional approaches, and delay could be fatal." "What exactly does the treatment involve?" Dr. Hawthorne asked, his question directed toward Sarah with newfound respect for her knowledge. Sarah opened to a specific page in Elena's journal, pointing to detailed preparation instructions. 3 herbs combined in precise ratios and steeped at specific temperatures for exact time periods. The preparation must be fresh, and administration follows a careful schedule over several hours. My grandmother noted that the treatment works by binding to the toxin and supporting the body's natural elimination processes. "Do we have access to these herbs?" Dr. Sullivan asked practically. "I keep a supply at home for minor ailments, and there are natural areas around the hospital where additional plants could be gathered if needed. The preparation would take about 40 minutes from start to finish." Dr. Hawthorne examined Captain Thompson's latest lab results, comparing them with Elena's descriptions of toxin progression patterns. The correlation was unsettlingly accurate, and conventional treatments had proven not only ineffective but possibly counterproductive. Professional pride warred with medical responsibility as he faced a decision that would define both his career and Captain Thompson's survival. "Dr. Sullivan, if we proceed with this treatment, I need your formal consultation documented in the patient's record. Nurse Martinez, I need you to prepare the herbal treatment under Dr. Sullivan's direct supervision. And I want continuous monitoring of all vital signs throughout the process." Sarah felt her hands trembling slightly as she gathered the necessary equipment for preparing Elena's traditional remedy. Lisa Chen appeared beside her with characteristic practical support, helping to assemble steeping vessels, measuring tools, and timing devices. The emergency room staff watched with fascination and apprehension as modern medical equipment was joined by preparation methods that predated contemporary medicine by generations. The herbs themselves seemed ordinary enough: willow bark for its anti-inflammatory properties, elderberry for immune system support, and wild cherry bark for respiratory assistance. But Elena's journal specified exact proportions and preparation sequences that transformed these common plants into a focused treatment for specific toxin exposure. Sarah followed her grandmother's instructions with meticulous care, measuring herb quantities with the precision that Elena had emphasized as critical for both safety and effectiveness. The steeping temperatures were monitored with clinical thermometers, and timing was tracked with hospital equipment to ensure accuracy down to the second. As the herbal preparation steeped, filling the emergency room with an earthy aroma that contrasted sharply with standard medical odors, Sarah found herself thinking about the generations of traditional healers who had developed and refined these methods. Elena had been part of an unbroken chain of knowledge that connected ancient wisdom with contemporary need, and now that connection was being tested in the most dramatic way possible. Dr. Sullivan supervised the preparation process with obvious interest in both the traditional methods and their potential integration with modern medical care. She asked detailed questions about Elena's research, the verification methods she had used, and the outcomes she had documented over decades of practice. Your grandmother was essentially conducting informal clinical trials, Dr. Sullivan observed. She was testing hypotheses, documenting variables, tracking outcomes, and refining treatments based on empirical evidence. The fact that she worked successfully with medical professionals suggests that her methods complement rather than compete with conventional care. When the preparation was complete, Sarah strained the herbal tea through medical-grade filters to ensure purity and safety. The resulting liquid was clear amber, warm but not hot, with an aroma that suggested both earthiness and vitality. Elena's journal specified exact administration amounts and timing intervals designed to maximize therapeutic effect while minimizing potential complications. Dr. Hawthorne examined the prepared treatment with obvious professional curiosity. How do we administer this? Standard oral medication protocols? My grandmother's notes specify small amounts given frequently over several hours, allowing the body to process the compounds gradually. She emphasized that rushing the treatment could reduce effectiveness or cause complications. The first administration of Elena's traditional remedy marked a moment of unprecedented collaboration between ancient knowledge and modern medicine. Captain Thompson received the treatment through careful oral administration, with continuous monitoring of his response to both the herbal compounds and the ongoing conventional supportive care. Within 20 minutes of the first dose, subtle changes began appearing in Captain Thompson's vital signs. His breathing became less labored, the grayish pallor of his skin started showing improvement, and his blood pressure readings moved toward more stable ranges. The changes were gradual but unmistakable, representing the first positive response to any treatment since his arrival at the hospital. Dr. Hawthorne watched the monitors with growing amazement and professional humility. The traditional treatment was producing measurable improvements that conventional medicine had failed to achieve, challenging his assumptions about the relationship between scientific evidence and effective healing. The toxin levels in his blood are dropping, Dr. Sullivan observed, reviewing the latest lab results. The herbal compounds appear to be facilitating elimination of the poisonous substances while supporting his body's recovery mechanisms. As the hours passed and additional doses of Elena's remedy were administered, Captain Thompson's improvement became increasingly dramatic. The distinctive rash that had been spreading across his body began fading, his respiratory distress diminished significantly, and his overall appearance transformed from critically ill to stable and recovering. By dawn, Captain Thompson was conscious, alert, and able to speak coherently about his experience during the survival training exercise that had led to his toxic exposure. He described accidentally disturbing a particular combination of plants while taking shelter during a simulated emergency scenario, confirming Sarah's initial assessment of the cause of his condition. Dr. Hawthorne found himself in the unprecedented position of documenting a successful treatment that combined traditional healing methods with contemporary medical support. The patient record would reflect both the failure of conventional approaches and the effectiveness of traditional knowledge, creating a case study that would challenge medical assumptions for years to come. As Captain Thompson's recovery continued, word began spreading through Riverside General Hospital about the extraordinary collaboration that had saved his life. Nurses, doctors, and administrators gathered to hear about the case where traditional healing had succeeded where modern medicine had failed, creating ripples of curiosity and respect that extended far beyond emergency room Ward 3. But the most significant impact was yet to come. Unknown to anyone at the hospital, Captain Thompson's survival training exercise had been part of a classified mission preparation, and his successful recovery would soon attract attention from the highest levels of military. And Thursday morning arrived with an unusual commotion outside Riverside General Hospital. Sarah was completing her documentation from the extraordinary night shift when Lisa Chen burst into the break room with wide eyes and barely contained excitement. "Sarah, you need to see what's happening in the parking lot. There are black SUVs everywhere, and I think I just saw military personnel setting up some kind of security perimeter." Through the break room window, Sarah could see the unmistakable signs of high-level government activity. Men and women in crisp suits moved with purposeful efficiency while military officers coordinated what appeared to be preparation for an important arrival. The sight filled her with curiosity mixed with apprehension about what Captain Thompson's recovery might have set in motion. Dr. Hawthorne appeared in the doorway, his usual authoritative demeanor replaced by something approaching bewilderment. "Nurse Martinez, I need you to come with me immediately. There are federal agents in my office asking specifically for you, and they're being very cryptic about the reason." Sarah followed Dr. Hawthorne through corridors that had become filled with serious-looking individuals wearing earpieces and maintaining constant communication with unseen coordinators. The atmosphere felt like something from a movie rather than the familiar environment of her workplace. The federal agents were polite but direct in their questioning. They wanted to understand exactly what had happened during Captain Thompson's treatment, the source of Sarah's knowledge about traditional healing methods, and the specific details of her grandmother's background and training. Their questions suggested that Captain Thompson's survival training exercise had been more significant than anyone at the hospital had realized. Nurse Martinez, the lead agent, said with respectful formality, Captain Thompson was preparing for a classified mission of national importance. His successful recovery has prevented a significant disruption to operations that could have affected national security. We understand that your quick thinking and specialized knowledge played a crucial role in saving his life. Before Sarah could fully process the implications of this information, the sound of helicopters approaching became audible through the hospital windows. The agents' radios crackled with confirmation that the main arrival was imminent, and they began coordinating final security arrangements with obvious urgency. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her voice reflecting the surreal nature of the situation. "Nurse Martinez, you're about to receive recognition from the highest level of government for your service to both Captain Thompson and national security interests. The President has specifically requested to meet with you and express the nation's gratitude personally." Sarah felt her knees weaken as the reality of the statement hit her. The President of the United States was coming to Riverside General Hospital specifically to thank her for using her grandmother's traditional healing knowledge to save Captain Thompson's life. The convergence of ancient wisdom and modern geopolitics created a moment that defied everything she had imagined possible. The presidential helicopter landed on the hospital's emergency landing pad with precision that demonstrated the advanced planning that had gone into this unprecedented visit. President Morrison emerged with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to making dramatic appearances, but his expression carried genuine warmth and gratitude rather than political calculation. Sarah found herself escorted to the hospital's main conference room, where she was joined by Dr. Hawthorne, Dr. Sullivan, Lisa Chen, and Captain Thompson himself, who had recovered sufficiently to participate in the recognition ceremony. The room had been transformed into an impromptu venue for presidential acknowledgement, complete with flags and ceremonial elements that emphasized the official nature of the proceedings. President Morrison addressed Sarah directly with words that would be remembered long after the cameras stopped recording. "Nurse Martinez, your courage in advocating for traditional healing methods, your dedication to patient care above professional convenience, and your willingness to challenge established protocols when lives were at stake represent the best of American values and medical service. Captain Thompson's mission involves protecting national interests that I cannot discuss in detail, but I can tell you that his recovery has prevented disruptions that could have had far-reaching consequences. Your grandmother's knowledge, passed down through generations and applied with your skill and judgment, has served not just one patient but the broader security of our nation." The President presented Sarah with a Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, recognizing her contribution to both medical advancement and national service. The ceremony acknowledged not just Sarah's individual actions but also the value of traditional knowledge and the importance of integrating diverse healing approaches within modern medical practice. Captain Thompson stepped forward to express his personal gratitude with words that carried the weight of someone who had faced mortality and emerged with renewed appreciation for life. "Nurse Martinez, your willingness to speak up when others remained silent, your knowledge of healing methods that saved my life, and your courage in standing up to authority when you knew you were right, these actions define true heroism." Dr. Hawthorne found himself in the unprecedented position of publicly acknowledging that traditional healing had succeeded where his conventional approaches had failed. The experience had transformed his understanding of medical knowledge and his respect for diverse healing traditions, creating a personal and professional evolution that would influence his practice for years to come. The presidential visit concluded with announcements of new federal initiatives to research and integrate traditional healing methods within conventional medical practice. Sarah's grandmother's journals would be studied by medical researchers seeking to understand the scientific principles behind traditional treatments, ensuring that Elena's knowledge would contribute to healing far beyond Pine Valley. As the presidential entourage departed, Sarah stood in the parking lot of Riverside General Hospital holding a medal that represented recognition beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. Her grandmother's wisdom had not only saved Captain Thompson's life but had also opened doors to broader acceptance of traditional knowledge within modern medicine. Lisa Chen joined her in the quiet aftermath of the extraordinary morning, both women processing the transformation of their ordinary workplace into a venue for presidential recognition. Your grandmother would be proud, Lisa said simply, capturing the emotional significance of the moment with characteristic directness. Sarah looked at the medal in her hands, then at the hospital where she would continue her nursing career with newfound respect from colleagues and administrators. Elena's teachings had proven their worth in the most dramatic way possible, validating generations of traditional healing knowledge and opening pathways for future integration of ancient wisdom with contemporary care. The story of the nurse who saved an Air Force pilot's life using ancient remedies would become part of medical folklore, inspiring healthcare professionals to value diverse knowledge sources and patients to advocate for comprehensive treatment approaches. But for Sarah, the most important outcome was knowing that her grandmother's legacy would continue healing people for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.